The grocery bags crashed to the kitchen floor, sending apples rolling across the linoleum like scattered promises. Denise Brooks stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the crumpled paper in her trembling hands. The words from Principal Thompson's note blurred through her tears. Amara's grades have dropped significantly. She's been falling asleep in class and seems distracted. We need to discuss her home situation. Home situation. The phrase cut through Denise like broken glass. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital, 12-hour days bleeding into 14-hour nights, just to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. She thought she was doing everything right. She thought Amara understood. "Baby, I'm home," Denise called out, her voice cracking despite her efforts to sound normal. The silence that echoed back felt heavier than usual. Their two-bedroom apartment, once filled with Amara's laughter and music, had grown quiet over the past few months. Denise had noticed but blamed it on teenage hormones and the stress of sophomore year. She found Amara's bedroom door closed, which wasn't unusual, but something felt different. Wrong. Denise knocked softly. "Amara? Honey, we need to talk." No response. "Amara, I got a call from school. Open this door, please." Still nothing. Denise's nurse training kicked in. The same instincts that had saved countless patients now screamed at her that something was terribly wrong. She turned the handle. The door was unlocked, the room empty. Amara's backpack sat on her unmade bed, homework scattered across her desk like she'd left in a hurry. But it was 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Amara should have been home from school for an hour already. Panic rose in Denise's chest, hot and suffocating. She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed Amara's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her daughter's voice, bright and young, asked her to leave a message. The sound made Denise's knees weak. "Amara, baby, call me right now. I'm worried sick. Where are you?" She hung up and immediately called back. Voicemail again. Denise ran to the living room window that faced the street, pressing her face against the glass. Their neighborhood in East Oakland was usually busy with after-school activity, kids walking home, parents picking up groceries, life moving at its normal pace. But she didn't see her daughter's familiar figure anywhere. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Can you pick up an extra shift tonight?" Rodriguez called in sick. Any other day Denise would have said yes. They needed the money desperately. But not today. Not when her 15-year-old daughter was missing and her grades were falling and Denise was apparently failing as a mother in ways she didn't even understand. She called her neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Carter, whose daughter Jasmine was in Amara's grade. "Lisa, have you seen Amara today? Is she with Jasmine?" "No, honey. Jasmine's been home doing homework since 3. Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Denise whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "I really don't know." She hung up and sank onto her couch, still clutching Principal Thompson's note. The paper was wrinkled now, damp with her sweat and tears. She read it again, looking for clues she might have missed. "Amara has been struggling academically and emotionally. She seems tired and distracted. Several teachers have expressed concern about her well-being. Additionally, there have been reports of her leaving campus during lunch periods. We need to schedule a conference immediately to discuss intervention strategies." Leaving campus during lunch periods. Denise felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Where was her daughter going? Why was she lying? How long had this been happening? The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in around her. Denise had worked so hard to create a safe space for them after Amara's father left 3 years ago. She'd taken extra shifts, gone back to school for her nursing degree, done everything she could to prove they'd be fine on their own. More than fine, they'd be strong, independent, unbreakable. But looking at this note, at her daughter's empty room, at the silence that had somehow crept into their lives without her noticing, Denise realized she'd been fooling herself. They weren't fine. Amara wasn't fine. And Denise had been so busy trying to be everything for everyone that she'd missed the signs that her own daughter was drowning. The front door rattled as someone fumbled with keys outside. Denise's heart leaped, then sank just as quickly. Those weren't Amara's footsteps. Too heavy, too tired. Still, hope made her rush to the door. But when she yanked it open, the hallway was empty except for their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Ruby Patterson, who was struggling with her own apartment door across the hall. The old woman looked up, startled by the sudden opening of Denise's door. "Oh, hello dear. I didn't mean to disturb you." Mrs. Ruby was probably in her late 70s, a tiny woman with silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun. She'd lived in the building longer than anyone, but Denise realized with shame that she barely knew anything about her beyond casual hallway greetings. The demands of single motherhood and work had left little room for neighborly relationships. "Mrs. Patterson, have you seen Amara today?" The old woman's face shifted, something flickering across her features that looked almost like guilt? But that couldn't be right. Well, Mrs. Ruby fumbled with her keys, dropping them with a loud clatter. "I'm sorry, dear. I need to get inside. My arthritis is acting up something fierce today." She bent slowly to retrieve her keys, and Denise felt a stab of remorse for bothering an elderly woman with her problems. But desperation made her persistent. "Please, Mrs. Patterson. I'm really worried. If you've seen anything at all." Mrs. Ruby straightened up, and for a moment, their eyes met across the hallway. In the old woman's gaze, Denise saw something that made her stomach drop: knowledge. Mrs. Ruby knew something about Amara. "I think," Mrs. Ruby said quietly, "you should come inside for a cup of tea. There are some things we need to discuss." The words hit Denise like a freight train. Mrs. Ruby knew where Amara had been going. As Denise followed the elderly woman into her apartment, her phone buzzed with another text from work, another bill notification, another demand on her time and energy. But for the first time in months, maybe years, everything else faded away except the truth she was about to learn about her daughter. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and old books, filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a different era. Family photos covered every surface: children and grandchildren at graduations, weddings, family reunions. It was warm and lived in a way that made Denise's heart ache with longing. "Sit down, honey," Mrs. Ruby said gently, gesturing to a worn but comfortable armchair. "This conversation has been a long time coming." Denise perched on the edge of the chair, every muscle in her body tight with anxiety. "Where is my daughter?" Mrs. Ruby moved slowly to the kitchen, her movements careful and deliberate. "She's safe. She's been safe. But there are things you need to understand about why she's been coming here, and why she made me promise not to tell you." The world tilted sideways. "Coming here? Amara's been coming here?" "Every day after school for the past 3 months," Mrs. Ruby said quietly. "Sometimes during lunch. She's been taking care of me, child. When I had that fall in June and couldn't get around so well, she started bringing me groceries, helping with my medications, making sure I ate proper meals." The words hit Denise like physical blows. 3 months. 3 months of her daughter living a secret life she knew nothing about. 3 months of Amara carrying responsibilities that belonged to adults, not 15-year-old girls. "But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" Mrs. Ruby returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, her movements slow but steady. "Because she was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you'd make her stop. Afraid you'd think she was neglecting her responsibilities at home. Afraid you'd see it as one more thing to worry about when you were already carrying so much." Denise felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. I never wanted her to feel like she couldn't come to me." "Oh, honey," Mrs. Ruby said, settling into the chair across from Denise. "That child loves you more than her own life. She's seen how hard you work, how much you sacrifice. She didn't want to add to your burden. But taking care of you shouldn't be her responsibility. You're not her burden either. You're a person who needs help, and there are resources, services." "Services that cost money," Mrs. Ruby said gently. "Services that require paperwork and waiting lists and proving you deserve help." Amara didn't see an elderly woman who needed services. She saw someone who needed kindness. Someone who needed family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. "I need to see her," Denise said, standing up abruptly. "I need to talk to her." "She's at the store," Mrs. Ruby said, "picking up my prescription and some groceries. She should be back soon." Denise sank back down, the full weight of the situation crashing over her. Her daughter, her baby, had been living a double life. Caring for an elderly neighbor, missing school, letting her grades slip, all while trying to protect Denise from knowing about it. "How bad is your health?" Denise asked, her nursing instincts kicking in. "What kind of help do you need?" Mrs. Ruby smiled sadly. "I'm managing. Better now with Amara's help. But I won't lie to you, I've been struggling since my son moved to Denver last year. Amara has been a godsend. We need to figure this out," Denise said firmly. "All of us together. Amara can't keep carrying this alone, and you shouldn't have to either." The sound of keys in the front door made them both freeze. Footsteps in the hallway getting closer. "Grandma Ruby?" Amara's voice called out. "I got your medicine, and they had those cookies you like on sale." Grandma Ruby. Denise's heart broke all over again. Her daughter had found the family connection she'd been missing, the grandparent relationship that Denise's own parents' deaths had taken away too early. But she'd done it in secret, carrying the weight of caring for another person without any support. The apartment door opened, and Amara walked in carrying 2 grocery bags. She was talking as she entered, her voice bright and animated in a way Denise hadn't heard in months. The pharmacist said to make sure you take the new pills with food, and Dr. Foster's office called to confirm your appointment next. Amara stopped mid-sentence when she saw her mother sitting in Mrs. Ruby's living room. The grocery bags slipped from her hands, just like Denise's had earlier, and for a moment that felt like eternity, mother and daughter stared at each other across a gulf of secrets and misunderstandings. "Mom," Amara whispered, her face crumpling with fear and guilt and exhaustion. "I can explain." And that's when Denise knew, this was the moment everything would change. For better or worse, the truth was finally out. Her daughter had been carrying the world on her shoulders, and Denise had been too busy trying to carry her own world to notice. The silence stretched between them, heavy with love and hurt and the weight of everything they'd been too afraid to say to each other. "Don't be angry with her," Mrs. Ruby said quickly, struggling to stand from her chair. "Please, Denise. She was just trying to help an old woman who needed it." But Denise wasn't angry. She was heartbroken. Looking at her daughter standing in that doorway, tall for 15 but somehow looking so young and scared, Denise saw everything she'd missed. The tiredness around Amara's eyes. The way her shoulders carried tension that belonged to adults. The careful way she moved, like someone who'd been carrying heavy things for too long. "Come here, baby," Denise said softly, opening her arms. Amara hesitated for a moment, then rushed across the room and collapsed into her mother's embrace. She felt smaller than she had in months, like the little girl she still was underneath all the responsibility she'd been carrying. "I'm sorry, Mama," Amara sobbed into Denise's shoulder. "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry my grades are bad. I'm sorry I worried you." "Shoo," Denise whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "We're going to figure this out. All of it. Together." Mrs. Ruby watched them from across the room, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "I told her she should tell you. I told her so many times. But she was so worried about adding to your stress." Denise looked up at the elderly woman over her daughter's head. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." Mrs. Ruby moved slowly back to her chair, her movements careful and deliberate. "It started in June. I'd been having dizzy spells, and one afternoon I fell in the hallway coming back from the mailbox. Amara found me there. Instead of just helping me up and going on her way, she stayed. Made sure I wasn't hurt. Helped me inside." Amara pulled back from her mother's embrace, wiping her eyes. She was so shaky, Mom. And she hadn't eaten anything all day. Her son had been sending money for groceries, but she was afraid to go to the store alone after falling. "So you went for her," Denise said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Just that once," Amara said quickly. "But then I noticed other things. Her medicine bottles were empty, and she was rationing her pills to make them last longer. She wasn't eating regular meals because cooking was getting hard for her. And she was so lonely, Mom. She would sit by her window all day watching for people to come home, just so she could see life happening." Denise felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same feeling she got at work when she saw patients who were alone, whose families were too busy or too far away to provide the care and connection every human being needed. "So you started coming by every day?" "After school," Amara nodded. "Just for an hour or two. I'd pick up groceries, help with medications, sometimes just sit and talk. Grandma Ruby has the most amazing stories about this neighborhood, about our family." "Our family?" Denise felt her breath catch. Mrs. Ruby and Amara exchanged a look, and Denise realized there were more secrets to uncover. "Your grandmother and I were friends," Mrs. Ruby said quietly. "Before you were born, when your mama was pregnant with you, she lived just 2 blocks from here. We went to the same church. I was there the day you came home from the hospital." The world tilted sideways again. Denise's grandmother had died when she was 12, and her mother had passed away from cancer when Amara was 10. She thought all connections to her family history were gone. "You knew my grandmother?" "Dorothy Brooks was like a sister to me," Mrs. Ruby said, her voice warm with memory. "We raised our children together, celebrated birthdays and holidays, supported each other through hard times. When she got sick, I helped care for her. When your mama was struggling as a young single mother, Dorothy and I would take turns watching you so she could work." Denise felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She had memories of an older woman who used to babysit her, someone kind and gentle who always had cookies and stories. But the memories were hazy, filtered through childhood and loss. "You were Ruby," she whispered. "You were the Ruby my grandmother used to talk about." I am, Mrs. Ruby said simply. And when I saw Amara's name on the mailbox when you moved in 3 years ago, I knew. Brooks isn't the most common last name, and that child has Dorothy's eyes and your mama's stubborn chin. Amara looked between them, her expression shifting from fear to something like hope. I didn't know at first. But when Grandma Ruby started telling me stories about a little girl named Denise whose grandmother was her best friend, I started putting it together. Why didn't you tell me? Denise asked, though she was beginning to understand. The same way Amara had been protecting her from worry about Mrs. Ruby's situation, she'd been protecting her from the pain of remembering lost family connections. I wanted to, Amara said. But you never talk about Grandma Dorothy or great-grandma. When they died, it hurt you so much. I thought maybe learning about Grandma Ruby would make you sad about missing them even more. Denise pulled her daughter close again, overwhelmed by the complexity of love and protection and loss that had shaped all their choices. Oh baby. Knowing about Mrs. Ruby doesn't make me sad about losing them. It makes me feel closer to them. Really? Amara's voice was small, hopeful. Really? And I understand why you didn't want to worry me about her situation. But honey, caring for an elderly person is a big responsibility. Too big for a 15-year-old to handle alone. I wasn't alone, Amara said quickly. Grandma Ruby taught me things. How to organize medicines, how to check if someone is eating enough, how to know when something might be wrong. She made me promise to tell her if I ever felt overwhelmed. And did you? Feel overwhelmed? Amara was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. Especially when she had that bad spell last month and I thought maybe she needed to go to the hospital. But she got better and I didn't want to scare anyone. Denise felt her heart clench. Her daughter had been making medical decisions, carrying the weight of another person's health and safety. It was too much for anyone, let alone a teenager. Mrs. Ruby, Denise said, turning to the elderly woman. I need to ask this as a nurse. How is your health really? What kind of care do you need? Mrs. Ruby straightened in her chair, and Denise saw a flash of the independent woman she must have been all her life. I have good days and bad days. Arthritis in my hands and knees. Some balance issues. I take medication for blood pressure and diabetes, nothing too complicated. But my eyesight isn't what it used to be, which makes reading medicine labels hard. And grocery shopping has become challenging. What about family? You mentioned a son in Denver? Marcus moved out there for work 2 years ago. He sends money and calls every week, but he's got his own family, his own responsibilities. He's been trying to convince me to move out there or consider assisted living, but this has been my home for 40 years. All my memories are here. Denise understood. Place mattered. Community mattered. Being uprooted from everything familiar could be devastating for elderly people. What about medical care? Do you have a doctor you like? Dr. Foster at the community clinic. He's a good man, understands folks like me who don't have fancy insurance or money for specialists. Amara has been coming with me to appointments when I need help remembering what he says. Another responsibility her daughter had been carrying. Another adult role she'd taken on without support. We're going to fix this, Denise said firmly. All of us together. But first we need to talk about school, Amara. Your grades have dropped and your principal is worried. Amara's face crumpled with fresh guilt. I know. I've been trying to keep up, but some days Grandma Ruby needed help during lunch, and I was tired in class because I'd stay here late helping with dinner and making sure she took her evening medicines. Why didn't you ask me for help? Because you're already working so hard. Amara burst out. You're at the hospital 12 hours a day and when you come home you're exhausted. I hear you crying sometimes late at night when you think I'm asleep. I see the bills on the kitchen table, the way you check our bank account 3 times before buying groceries. I didn't want to add one more thing to your list of things to worry about. The words hit Denise like a slap. Her daughter had been watching her struggle, absorbing her stress, trying to protect her from additional burdens. In her efforts to be strong and independent, Denise had made Amara feel like she couldn't come to her for help. Baby, she said softly, you are not responsible for protecting me from life. That's my job as your mother, not your job as my daughter. But you're always saying we have to be strong, that we can handle anything as long as we stick together. I am. But being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Being strong means knowing when to ask for help, when to accept support, when to let people who care about you share the load. Mrs. Ruby nodded from her chair. That's what I've been trying to tell her. Community isn't about one person doing everything. It's about everyone doing something. Denise looked around Mrs. Ruby's apartment, at the photos of family gatherings, the evidence of a life lived in connection with others. Then she thought about her own apartment across the hall, sparse and practical, lacking the warmth that came from shared experiences and mutual support. "I think," she said slowly, "we've all been trying to be too independent. Mrs. Ruby, you've been managing alone when you could have had help. Amara, you've been trying to solve everything by yourself. And I've been so focused on proving we don't need anyone that I forgot we're allowed to want people in our lives. So what do we do now?" Amara asked. Denise stood up, feeling more clear-headed than she had in months. "Now we figure out how to be a family. All three of us. And we start by being honest about what everyone needs." Mrs. Ruby smiled through her tears. "I'd like that very much." "Me too," Amara said. "But Mom, what about work? What about money? What about all the things you're stressed about?" Denise pulled her daughter close and reached out to take Mrs. Ruby's hand. "We'll figure it out together. That's what families do." For the first time in months, the silence that settled over them felt peaceful instead of heavy. They sat there in Mrs. Ruby's warm living room, three generations of women who had found each other across loss and fear and the courage to care. Outside, the sun was setting over Oakland, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Inside, something new was beginning, not just healing but hope. The next morning, Denise called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Not because she was physically ill, but because her family needed her more than the hospital did, and she was finally ready to admit that was okay. She found Amara in the kitchen, already dressed for school but moving slowly, like she was dreading the day ahead. "Morning, baby," Denise said, wrapping her arms around her daughter from behind. "How did you sleep?" "Okay, I guess." Amara leaned into her mother's embrace. "Mom, what's going to happen at school today?" "Principal Thompson is expecting you to call her back." "I'm going to call her back. And we're going to have that conference. But first, I want to go check on Mrs. Ruby, and I want you to come with me." Amara turned in her arms. "You're not going to work?" "Nope. Today, my priority is figuring out how we're going to make this new situation work for everyone." Relief flooded Amara's face. "Really? Really? But I need you to understand something important. Going forward, no more secrets. If Mrs. Ruby needs help, we discuss it together. If you're struggling with school, we tackle it together. If I'm stressed about work or money, I'll share that with you in age-appropriate ways instead of trying to hide it. Deal?" "Deal," Amara said, the word coming out like a sigh of relief. They knocked on Mrs. Ruby's door a few minutes later, carrying a plate of scrambled eggs and toast that Denise had made with the last of their groceries. "Good morning, ladies," Mrs. Ruby said when she opened the door. She looked better this morning, steadier on her feet, more color in her cheeks. "I wasn't expecting to see you so early." "We brought breakfast," Amara said, holding up the plate. "And Mom wants to talk about how we can help you the right way." They settled in Mrs. Ruby's living room again, and Denise felt that same sense of warmth and belonging she'd experienced the night before. This felt like home in a way their apartment across the hall never had. "Mrs. Ruby, I want to be direct with you," Denise said. "As a nurse, I can see that you need regular support to stay independent and safe. As Amara's mother, I can't have my 15-year-old carrying that responsibility alone. And as someone who just discovered you're practically family, I want to help. But we need to do this properly." Mrs. Ruby nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" "First, I want to understand exactly what kind of help you need. Then I want to look into what resources are available. And then I want to figure out how we can create a support system that works for everyone." "But what about money?" Amara asked. "Grandma Ruby can't afford expensive help, and we can't either." "There are programs," Denise said. "Medicare, Medicaid, county services, church-based support, community organizations. I work in healthcare. I know how to navigate these systems. We just need to explore options." Mrs. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "I've been so scared of those systems. All the paperwork, all the questions about income and assets. I was afraid they'd decide I needed to be in a nursing home." "That's not how it works," Denise assured her. "The goal is to help people stay in their homes as long as possible. But you do need advocates, people who understand the system and can help you access what you're entitled to." "Like you," Mrs. Ruby said softly. "Like me. Like us." Amara leaned forward on the couch. "So I can still help take care of Grandma Ruby? Just not alone?" "You can absolutely still help. But your primary job is being a student and a 15-year-old girl. Mrs. Ruby's care shouldn't be the reason your grades are slipping or you're exhausted in class." "What if we made a schedule?" Amara suggested. "Like, I could come by after school for an hour to visit and help with small things, but the bigger stuff, doctor appointments, grocery shopping, medication management, that could be shared with other people?" Denise smiled at her daughter's thoughtfulness. That sounds like a good starting point. But Mrs. Ruby, what do you think? What would feel most helpful to you? Mrs. Ruby was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands folded in her lap. I've been alone for so long, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have people care about my daily life. Yesterday, when Amara didn't come by after school because of your meeting, I realized how much I'd come to depend on her company, not just her help. You won't be alone, Denise said firmly. We're going to figure this out. But I don't want to be a burden. Mrs. Ruby, Amara interrupted gently, you told me that family isn't about being a burden or not being a burden. You said family is about showing up for each other. Remember? The elderly woman smiled through her tears. I remember. That child is wise beyond her years. She gets it from her great-grandmother, Denise said. According to you, my grandmother was pretty wise too. Dorothy would be so proud of both of you, Mrs. Ruby said. She always said family isn't just about blood, it's about choice and commitment and love. Denise felt something settle in her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. They were rebuilding something that had been lost, creating something new from the pieces of what had been. Okay, she said, pulling out her phone. Let's start making some calls. First, I'm going to call Principal Thompson and explain the situation. Then I'm going to call Dr. Foster's office and see if I can speak with him about Mrs. Ruby's care plan. And then we're going to research what community resources are available. What about work? Amara asked. Won't you get in trouble for calling in sick? I'll figure that out. One thing at a time. The call with Principal Thompson went better than expected. When Denise explained the situation, that Amara had been secretly caring for an elderly neighbor who turned out to be a family friend, and that they were working to create a proper support system, the principal's tone shifted from concern to understanding. That explains a lot about Amara's behavior, Principal Thompson said. The tiredness, the distraction, even the academic struggles. She's been carrying an adult's responsibility. Yes, and we're working to change that. Is there any way we can get her some support to catch up academically? Maybe speak with her teachers about extra credit or make up work. Absolutely. When teenagers are dealing with family stress or caregiving responsibilities, we have resources to help them get back on track. Can you come in this week for a proper conference? Yes. And Mrs. Thompson? Thank you for calling this to my attention. I might not have discovered what was happening otherwise. The call with Dr. Foster's office was equally productive. The nurse practitioner who handled his elderly patients was familiar with Mrs. Ruby's case and immediately understood what Denise was asking about. Mrs. Patterson definitely qualifies for several support programs, she said. Home health aid services, meal delivery, medication management support. The problem is usually that older adults don't know how to navigate the application process, or they're afraid of the bureaucracy. I'm a nurse, Denise said. I can help her with applications and advocacy. That would be wonderful. Dr. Foster has been worried about her social isolation as much as her physical health. Having family support makes an enormous difference in outcomes for elderly patients. By noon, they had a list of resources to explore and appointments scheduled for the following week. Denise felt more hopeful than she had in months. Mom, Amara said as they prepared lunch in Mrs. Ruby's kitchen, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you scared? About the changes, I mean. About having more people in our lives, more responsibilities? Denise paused in her stirring of the soup they were making. It was a good question, one that deserved an honest answer. A little, she admitted. For the past 3 years it's been just us. I've gotten used to being in control, making all the decisions, not having to coordinate with anyone else. This will be different. Different how? Different like, we'll have to consider Mrs. Ruby's needs when we make plans. Different like we'll be part of a community instead of just a family of 2. Different like we'll have more people who care about us, but also more people whose feelings we need to consider. That sounds good to me, Amara said quietly. Me too, Denise admitted. I think I've been so afraid of losing people that I forgot how good it feels to gain them. Mrs. Ruby appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving slowly but steady. Did I hear someone talking about gaining people? We were talking about how our family is growing, Amara said, going to help Mrs. Ruby to a chair. Our family, Mrs. Ruby repeated, settling down with a contented sigh. I like the sound of that. That afternoon, while Amara worked on homework at Mrs. Ruby's kitchen table, Denise sat with the elderly woman and really talked for the first time. Mrs. Ruby told her stories about her grandmother Dorothy, about their friendship, about the community they'd built together, about the way they'd supported each other through raising children and facing challenges. Your grandmother worried about you, Mrs. Ruby said. After your mama passed away, she was so concerned about you raising Amara alone. She was. She used to say you were too strong for your own good. That you'd inherited the family stubbornness, but you'd also inherited the family heart. She hoped you'd learn to let people help you before you wore yourself out trying to do everything alone. Denise felt tears prick her eyes. I wish she could see this. See us figuring it out. Oh, honey, Mrs. Ruby said softly, who says she can't? That evening, as they prepared to return to their own apartment, Amara lingered in Mrs. Ruby's doorway. Grandma Ruby, she said, I'm sorry I kept all this secret for so long. Child, you don't have anything to apologize for. You did what you thought was right with the information you had. That's all any of us can do. But things are going to be better now, right? More honest and open? Much better, Mrs. Ruby assured her. And much more honest. As they walked across the hall to their own home, Denise realized their apartment felt different too. Less isolated, less like a fortress against the world. More like a home that was connected to other homes, part of a larger story. Mom, Amara said as they got ready for bed, thank you. For what? For not being angry. For understanding why I kept the secret. For wanting to help Grandma Ruby instead of making me stop. Thank you for caring about her, Denise replied. And for trusting me with the truth even when you were scared. That night, Denise lay in bed thinking about community, about family, about the way love could expand instead of divide when you let it. Across the hall, Mrs. Ruby was probably lying in her own bed, no longer alone and anxious about the future. And down the hall, Amara was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, the weight of secret caregiving finally lifted from her young shoulders. They still had work to do, systems to navigate, new rhythms to establish. But for the first time since her mother's death, Denise felt like they were part of something larger than just their small family of two. They were part of a community, a network of care and connection that could weather whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Denise stood in the hallway outside the conference room at Amara's school, holding a folder full of documentation and feeling more prepared than she had in years. Next to her, Amara shifted nervously from foot to foot. It's going to be fine, baby, Denise assured her. We have a plan and everyone understands the situation now. I know. I just hate that my grades got so bad. But they're already improving, right? Since we redistributed the responsibilities with Mrs. Ruby? Amara nodded. Mr. Peterson said my chemistry quiz yesterday was my best work in months. And I actually stayed awake for all of English class this week. They entered the conference room where Principal Thompson waited with 3 of Amara's teachers. Everyone looked up as they arrived, and Denise was relieved to see friendly, concerned faces instead of the stern judgment she'd feared. Thank you all for being here, Principal Thompson said as they took their seats. Denise, why don't you start by updating us on the situation at home? Denise opened her folder. As I mentioned in our phone call, Amara had been caring for our elderly neighbor without my knowledge. We've now established a proper support system that includes professional services, family assistance, and community resources. She handed out copies of the schedule they'd created. Amara now spends 1 hour after school, 3 days a week, visiting with Mrs. Ruby. I handle medical appointments, grocery shopping, and medication management. We've also arranged for meal delivery twice a week and a home health aide for personal care assistance. Ms. Rodriguez, Amara's English teacher, looked impressed. This is incredibly thorough. Amara, how are you feeling about the new arrangement? So much better, Amara said honestly. I was really stressed about taking care of Grandma Ruby all by myself, but I didn't want her to be alone. Now she has lots of people looking out for her, and I can just focus on being her friend instead of being responsible for everything. And your energy levels? Your ability to concentrate in class? Asked Mr. Peterson, her chemistry teacher. Way better. I'm still tired sometimes, but not that exhausted feeling I had before. And I'm not worrying all the time about whether she's okay while I'm at school. Principal Thompson nodded approvingly. What about catching up academically? We know you fell behind during those months when you were carrying so much responsibility. This was the part Denise had been most worried about, but she'd come prepared. We've arranged for Amara to have a tutor twice a week through the community center. Mrs. Ruby's son in Denver is paying for it as part of his contribution to his mother's care. And I've spoken with each of her teachers about extra credit opportunities. I've already turned in 2 makeup assignments, Amara added. And Ms. Rodriguez is letting me rewrite my essay about community service, which I can actually write about now that I understand it better. Ms. Rodriguez smiled. I'm looking forward to reading it. Your experience with Mrs. Ruby has given you insights about community care that most students your age don't have. Which brings up an interesting point, said Mrs. Kim, Amara's social studies teacher. We've been discussing your situation in our staff meetings, and we're wondering if you'd be interested in joining our community service learning program. Amara looked at her mother, then back at Mrs. Kim. What's that? It's a program where students get academic credit for community service work, but it's structured and supervised. You'd work with local organizations serving elderly residents, and you'd write reflective essays connecting your service to classroom learning about sociology, public health, and community development. Denise felt a surge of pride. That sounds perfect for Amara. I'd love that, Amara said, her face lighting up. Could I work with the senior center? Maybe help other students learn how to support elderly neighbors. Absolutely, Mrs. Kim said. And it would count toward your community service graduation requirement. Principal Thompson leaned forward. There's one more thing we'd like to discuss. Amara, your counselor mentioned that you've been thinking about a career in healthcare. Is that still accurate? Yes, ma'am. More than ever, actually. Taking care of Grandma Ruby made me realize how much I like helping people with their health and wellness. What kind of healthcare interests you most? Amara glanced at her mother. Maybe nursing, like my mom. Or maybe social work, helping elderly people navigate services and stay in their homes. Denise's heart swelled. Her daughter had found her calling through this experience, had discovered a sense of purpose that could guide her academic and career choices. Well, Principal Thompson said, we have a healthcare pathway program that starts junior year. It includes advanced science courses, internship opportunities at local hospitals and clinics, and college credit courses in health sciences. Really? Amara's eyes widened. Really? Your experience with Mrs. Ruby would actually be an asset in the application process. You have hands-on understanding of patient care and family dynamics that most applicants don't have. After the meeting, as they walked to the car, Amara was practically bouncing with excitement. Mom, did you hear all that? The community service program, the healthcare pathway, the tutoring? Everything's actually working out. Denise laughed, infected by her daughter's enthusiasm. It is, isn't it? Sometimes when we stop trying to control everything and start working with people instead of around them, solutions appear that we never could have imagined. Is that what we did? Worked with people instead of around them? That's exactly what we did. Instead of you trying to handle Mrs. Ruby's care alone, instead of me trying to manage our finances and your education alone, instead of Mrs. Ruby trying to age in place alone, we created a team. I like being part of a team, Amara said thoughtfully. When they got home, they found Mrs. Ruby sitting in the hallway outside her apartment, looking distressed. What's wrong? Denise asked immediately, her nurse instincts kicking in. I locked myself out, Mrs. Ruby said, looking embarrassed. The aide who came this morning must not have latched the door properly when she left, and when I went to get the mail, it closed behind me. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. Why didn't you knock on our door? Amara asked. I didn't want to bother you. I know you had the school meeting today. Denise felt that familiar pang of recognition, the instinct to handle problems alone, to not bother people with needs and challenges. She was seeing herself reflected in Mrs. Ruby's reluctance to ask for help. Mrs. Ruby, she said gently, remember what we talked about? We're family now. Family bothers each other. That's part of the deal. Mrs. Ruby smiled ruefully. Old habits die hard. Tell me about it, Denise muttered, pulling out her phone. Let me call the building manager and see if he can let you in. While they waited for the manager to arrive, they sat in the hallway together. 3 generations of women who were still learning how to accept help and offer it without fear or shame. How did the school meeting go? Mrs. Ruby asked. Really well, Amara said, and launched into an excited recounting of the community service program and healthcare pathway opportunities. That's wonderful, Mrs. Ruby said when Amara finished. Your great-grandmother Dorothy would be so proud. She always said education was the key to building the life you want. Grandma Ruby, Amara said, would you help me with my community service essay? You know so much about what elderly people need and want. I'd be honored to help. The building manager arrived and let Mrs. Ruby into her apartment. As he left, he turned back to them. You know, he said, I've been managing this building for 15 years, and I've never seen neighbors look out for each other the way you ladies do. It's nice to see. After Mrs. Ruby was safely inside and they'd returned to their own apartment, Denise found herself thinking about the manager's comment. How many other elderly residents in their building might be struggling alone? How many other single mothers were trying to manage everything without support? How many other teenagers were carrying responsibilities too heavy for their young shoulders? Amara, she said over dinner, what would you think about expanding what we're doing with Mrs. Ruby? What do you mean? I mean, what if we started a support network for this building? For the whole neighborhood? What if we helped other families figure out how to care for elderly relatives? What if we created a system where people looked out for each other instead of everyone struggling alone? Amara's eyes lit up. Like a community care network? Exactly like that. Could we really do something that big? Denise thought about everything they'd accomplished in just 2 weeks. Navigating school systems, healthcare systems, social services, family dynamics. I think we could. Especially if we partnered with organizations that are already doing this work. The senior center Mrs. Kim mentioned might want to help, Amara suggested. And Dr. Foster's clinic. And maybe our church. This is so cool, Mom. We could actually help other families not go through what we went through. Other families and other Mrs. Rubis, Denise agreed. That night, as Denise tucked her daughter into bed, something she hadn't done in months but that had somehow started happening again, Amara looked up at her thoughtfully. Mom, can I tell you something? Always. I'm glad I got in trouble at school. Denise laughed. That's not something I expected to hear. But it's true. If Principal Thompson hadn't called you, we might have kept going the way we were. Me getting more and more tired, you getting more and more stressed, Grandma Ruby getting more and more isolated. The secret was making everything harder, even though I was trying to make everything easier. That's a wise observation, baby. I learned it from you and Grandma Ruby. You both taught me that secrets, even ones that come from love, usually make things harder instead of easier. Denise kissed her daughter's forehead. Sweet dreams, my wise girl. As she turned off the light and headed to her own room, Denise reflected on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. They'd gone from a family of 2 trying to manage everything alone to part of a community network that was growing stronger every day. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the hospital. Hope you're feeling better. By the way, there's a position opening up in our community health outreach program. Day shift, better hours, working with elderly patients and their families. Thought you might be interested. Denise stared at the message in amazement. Even work opportunities were shifting to align with their new life. She typed back, very interested. Let's talk tomorrow. Everything was changing, and for the first time in years, change felt like possibility instead of threat. 3 weeks later, Denise stood in the community room of their apartment building, looking at the circle of folding chairs she and Amara had set up. In 2 hours, they would host their first community care circle meeting, and she was nervous. What if nobody comes? Amara asked, echoing her mother's thoughts as she arranged informational flyers on a small table. Then we'll try again next month, Denise said, though her stomach was churning with anxiety. Sometimes good ideas take time to catch on. Mrs. Ruby emerged from the kitchen area carrying a coffee pot and wearing one of her best dresses. In my experience, when you offer people coffee and cookies and a chance to connect with their neighbors, they show up. But what if we don't know how to run a meeting? What if people ask questions we can't answer? Then we'll figure it out together, Mrs. Ruby said firmly. That's what this whole thing is about, remember? People helping people. The idea for the community care circle had grown organically over the past month. After successfully establishing Mrs. Ruby's support system, word had somehow spread through the building. Mrs. Carter from across the hall had asked for advice when her mother-in-law started showing signs of dementia. The young father in 3B had mentioned struggling to care for his elderly grandfather while working 2 jobs. The woman in 2A had been looking for resources for her arthritic mother. One conversation had led to another, and before Denise knew it, she was planning a monthly meeting to help neighbors share resources and support each other. I still can't believe the senior center agreed to partner with us, Amara said, checking the time on her phone. Or that Dr. Foster's clinic is sending someone to talk about healthcare resources, Denise added. Or that the social worker from the county aging department wants to come, Mrs. Ruby said with a smile. Sometimes when you start something good, other people want to help make it even better. The first person to arrive was Mrs. Carter, carrying her 6-year-old daughter Zoe and looking grateful but tired. Thank you so much for organizing this, she said to Denise. I've been feeling so overwhelmed since my mother-in-law moved in with us. I love her, but I don't know anything about caring for someone with dementia. That's exactly why we wanted to start this, Denise assured her. None of you should have to figure this out alone. Over the next 30 minutes, people trickled in steadily. The young father from 3B, whose name turned out to be Jerome, The woman from 2A, Elena, who brought her elderly mother, Rosa. An older man from the first floor who was caring for his wife after her stroke. A teenage girl who had been helping her grandmother with diabetes management. By 7 o'clock, they had 15 people gathered in a circle, ranging in age from 6-year-old Zoe to 82-year-old Rosa. Denise looked around at all the faces, tired, hopeful, curious, and felt a familiar flutter of nerves. "Welcome everyone," she began, her voice slightly shaky. "I'm Denise and this is my daughter Amara and our neighbor Mrs. Ruby. A few months ago, we discovered that we were all trying to handle family caregiving situations by ourselves, and we realized that approach wasn't working for any of us." She told their story briefly: Amara's secret caregiving, the school crisis, the discovery of family connections, the successful creation of a support system. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding around the circle, recognition and relief on people's faces. "The thing we learned," Amara added when her mother finished, "is that caring for people is actually easier when you have help and resources and other people who understand what you're going through. So tonight," Mrs. Ruby said, "we want to start building that kind of community right here in our own building, our own neighborhood." Denise gestured to the representatives from various organizations who had agreed to attend. "We've invited some experts to share information about resources that are available. But mostly, we want this to be a place where neighbors can share what they've learned and support each other." The next hour was a revelation. Jerome, the young father, had discovered a program that provided respite care for caregivers who needed breaks. Elena had found a support group for Spanish-speaking families dealing with aging parents. The teenage girl, Destiny, had learned about a scholarship program for students who were family caregivers. The social worker from the county shared information about benefits and services that many people in the room didn't know they qualified for. The representative from the senior center talked about programs that could provide socialization and activities for elderly residents. Dr. Foster's nurse practitioner explained how to advocate for elderly patients in medical settings. But the most powerful moments came when people simply shared their experiences with each other. "I thought I was the only teenager dealing with this," Destiny said to Amara. "All my friends are worried about normal stuff like homework and dating, and I'm trying to figure out how to help my grandma remember to take her insulin." "I was carrying all that alone for months," Amara replied. "It was so lonely. But it doesn't have to be. I felt like such a failure when my mother-in-law wandered out of the house and got lost last week," Mrs. Carter said, tears in her eyes. "I thought good daughters-in-law were supposed to be able to handle everything." "Honey," said the elderly man caring for his wife, "we all feel like failures sometimes. That's why we need each other." By the end of the meeting, they had established a phone tree for emergencies, a rotating dinner schedule for families going through health crises, and a resource-sharing system for equipment like wheelchairs and walkers that people might need temporarily. More importantly, they had created a space where people felt permission to ask for help and offer it without shame. "Same time next month?" Mrs. Ruby asked as people prepared to leave. The response was unanimous: yes. After everyone had gone and they were cleaning up the community room, Amara flopped down in one of the folding chairs. "That was amazing," she said. "Did you see how relieved everyone looked when they realized they weren't alone?" "I saw," Denise said, stacking chairs. "I also saw how much knowledge and wisdom was in that room." Jerome's information about respite care could help Mrs. Carter. Elena's experience with bilingual services could help other Spanish-speaking families. Everyone had something to offer. "It's like what you said about being strong, meaning asking for help instead of doing everything alone," Amara observed. Mrs. Ruby nodded from where she was packing up leftover cookies. Community care isn't about one person being strong enough to handle everything. It's about everyone being strong enough to handle something. As they walked back to their apartments, Denise reflected on how much their lives had changed since that day she'd found Principal Thompson's note. They'd gone from isolated and struggling to connected and supported. From secrets and silence to openness and communication. From a family of two to part of an extended community network. "Mom," Amara said as they reached their door, "I have something to tell you." Denise's heart skipped, but Amara was smiling, not looking worried. "What is it?" "I got my chemistry test back today. I got an A-. "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. But that's not the best part. The best part is that when Mr. Peterson handed it back, he said he could tell I was less stressed and more focused. He said whatever changes we made at home are working." Denise felt tears prick her eyes. "They are working, aren't they?" "Yeah, they are. And Mom? I'm proud of you too." "For what?" "For being brave enough to change. For being willing to let people help us. For creating something that helps other families too." That night, Denise lay in bed thinking about the faces around the circle at their meeting. Each person had arrived carrying the weight of caring for someone they loved, feeling alone and overwhelmed. But they'd left with phone numbers, resources, and most importantly, the knowledge that they were part of a community. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. The community health outreach position is yours if you want it. Start date is flexible. Let me know. Denise smiled in the darkness. The new job would mean working with elderly patients and their families, helping them navigate healthcare systems and community resources. It would mean using everything she'd learned from their experience with Mrs. Ruby to help other families avoid the isolation and struggle they'd experienced. She typed back, "I want it. Thank you." Across the hall, Mrs. Ruby was probably lying in her own bed, no longer anxious about the future. The network of care they'd built around her was strong and sustainable. She had Amara's visits to look forward to, Denise's help with medical and practical needs, professional services for personal care, and now a whole community of neighbors who checked on her regularly. Down the hall, Amara was sleeping peacefully, no longer carrying the weight of secret responsibilities. Her grades were improving, her stress levels had decreased, and she'd found a sense of purpose that would guide her toward a career in healthcare or social services. But perhaps most importantly, they'd all learned that independence didn't mean doing everything alone. True independence meant building the relationships and systems that allowed everyone to thrive. Community care wasn't just about helping Mrs. Ruby age in place with dignity. It was about creating a world where no one had to face life's challenges in isolation, where asking for help was seen as wisdom rather than weakness, where everyone had something to offer and something to receive. As Denise drifted off to sleep, she thought about the next community care circle meeting, about the families they might be able to help, about the network of support that was growing stronger every month. Change, she realized, didn't have to be something that happened to you. Sometimes, if you were brave enough and willing enough to let people help, change could be something beautiful that you created together. 2 months after their first community care circle meeting, Denise found herself dealing with challenges she hadn't anticipated. The network was growing faster than they'd expected, and with growth came complexity. "Mom, we have a problem," Amara said, bursting into their apartment after school. "Mrs. Patterson in 4C is fighting with her daughter about the aid we helped her get. And Jerome's grandfather fell yesterday, and Jerome doesn't know if he should call 911 or his grandpa's doctor or what. And Destiny missed school again because her grandmother had a diabetes emergency." Denise looked up from the stack of paperwork on their kitchen table. Applications for services, contact information for new community members, notes from various support meetings. Their simple idea of neighbors helping neighbors had evolved into something much more complex. "Slow down, baby. One thing at a time." Amara flopped into a chair, looking overwhelmed. "It's just, everyone keeps coming to us with these big problems and sometimes I don't know what to tell them. What if we give someone bad advice? What if someone gets hurt because we said the wrong thing?" Denise recognized the anxiety in her daughter's voice, the same feeling she'd been battling herself. When they'd started the community care circle, she'd imagined sharing resources and providing mutual support. She hadn't anticipated becoming the unofficial coordinators of care for half their building. "You're right," she admitted. "This has gotten bigger than we expected. Maybe it's time to talk to Mrs. Ruby about how to handle it." They found Mrs. Ruby in her kitchen, preparing dinner with the help of her new aide, Marlene, a warm woman in her 50s who came 3 times a week to assist with cooking, cleaning, and personal care. "Evening, ladies," Mrs. Ruby said when she saw them. "You both look like you've had quite a day." "We need advice," Denise said, settling into her usual chair at Mrs. Ruby's table. "The community care circle is growing so fast that we're getting overwhelmed. People are calling us with emergencies, asking us to solve problems that are beyond what we know how to handle." Mrs. Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "Growing pains. I've seen this before with church committees and neighborhood organizations. Success brings its own challenges." "What do you mean?" Amara asked. "Well, when people are desperate for help in community, and they find a place that provides it, word spreads quickly. Soon you have more people than you can serve, and more complex problems than you're equipped to handle." "So what do we do?" Denise asked. "We can't turn people away, but we also can't be responsible for everyone's care decisions. You set boundaries," Mrs. Ruby said simply. "You decide what you can and cannot provide, and you help people connect with appropriate professional resources for everything else." Marlene looked up from where she was stirring a pot of soup. "My sister runs a family support group for caregivers. She says the most important thing is knowing when to refer people to experts instead of trying to handle everything yourself. But how do we set boundaries without making people feel like we don't care? Amara asked. Mrs. Ruby smiled at her. By caring enough to connect them with the right kind of help. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, "This is beyond my knowledge, but I know someone who can help." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Denise opened it to find Jerome looking frantic. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. My grandfather fell again and this time he hit his head. He says he's fine, but there's a bump and he seems confused. Should I take him to the emergency room? Call his doctor? I don't know what to do." "This feels so much better," Amara said after their first restructured meeting. Jerome's grandmother needed medical case management that Ms. Rodriguez could provide. Mrs. Patterson needed family mediation services that the senior center social worker could offer. And Destiny needed educational support that the school counselor could arrange. But they all still needed the community connections too, Denise pointed out. They needed to know they weren't alone, that other people understood what they were going through. Right. We just don't have to be the experts on everything anymore. Mrs. Ruby, who had attended the meeting as both participant and advisor, was pleased with the changes. "This feels sustainable," she said. "And it feels safe. People are getting the right kind of help for their specific needs." But perhaps the most significant change was in how the community members related to each other. Instead of turning to Denise and Amara for all guidance, people began connecting directly with each other. Elena, whose mother had dementia, started a support group for Spanish-speaking caregivers. Jerome and two other men in the building formed a support network for male caregivers, who they discovered faced different challenges than female caregivers. Destiny and Amara organized a study group for student caregivers, helping each other balance academic responsibilities with family care. "It's becoming what we always hoped it would be," Denise told her mother during their weekly phone call. "A real community where people support each other, not just one family trying to help everyone." "I'm proud of you," her mother said. "And I think your grandmother would be proud too. She always believed in the power of community to heal and support." That evening, as Denise reviewed her notes from the day's activities, she realized they had learned something crucial about sustainable community building. Caring for each other didn't mean taking responsibility for fixing everyone's problems. It meant creating systems where people could access the right kind of help and support each other through the process. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, Dr. Foster's nurse practitioner. "Great meeting today. I think we're creating something really special here. Looking forward to next month." Another text from Ms. Rodriguez. "3 of the families from your group have connected with our services and are doing much better. This partnership is working." And finally, a text from Amara, who was studying in her room. "Mom, thank you for teaching me that it's okay to not know everything. But it's not okay to not try to help." Denise smiled, feeling more grounded and purposeful than she had in years. They were building something that could last, something that honored both the complexity of caregiving and the simple power of neighbors caring for neighbors. The community care circle was no longer just about their family or even Mrs. Ruby. It was about creating a model for how communities could support their most vulnerable members while protecting the well-being of caregivers. It was about proving that professional services and community support could work together instead of in isolation. Most importantly, it was about demonstrating that no one, not elderly people aging in place, not family caregivers, not teenagers balancing school and family responsibilities, had to face life's challenges alone. 6 months after starting the community care circle, Denise received a phone call that would change everything again. "Is this Denise Brooks?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "Yes, this is Denise. My name is Marcus Patterson. I think you know my mother, Ruby Patterson?" Denise felt her heart skip. Mrs. Ruby's son, calling from Denver. In all their months of caring for Mrs. Ruby, Marcus had remained a distant figure, the son who sent money and called weekly but felt too far away to help with daily care. "Yes, I know your mother well. Is everything okay?" "More than okay," Marcus said, and Denise could hear the emotion in his voice. "I'm calling because I wanted to thank you and your daughter for what you've done for my mom. But also because I have some news that I think you'll find interesting." "What kind of news?" "I'm moving back to Oakland. My company is transferring me to the Bay Area office, and I'll be able to help care for my mother directly. But that's not the biggest news." Denise waited, sensing there was more. "The biggest news is that I've been following what you've been doing with the community care circle. My mother sends me updates every week about the meetings, the families you're helping, the partnerships you've built with local organizations." "She does?" "Oh yes. She's incredibly proud of the work you're doing. And so am I. Which is why I'm calling with a proposition. Marcus went on to explain that he worked in nonprofit administration, specializing in community health programs. His company had been looking for opportunities to support innovative community-based care models, and the Community Care Circle was exactly the kind of program they wanted to fund and help expand. What exactly are you proposing? Denise asked, still trying to process this unexpected development. Seed funding to formalize your program. Training and support to help you expand to other neighborhoods. Partnership with established organizations to create a sustainable model that could be replicated citywide. Denise felt dizzy. We never intended for this to become that big. The best community programs usually start small and grow organically, Marcus said. That's exactly what makes them authentic and effective. You've proven the model works. Now we want to help you scale it so other communities can benefit. After hanging up, Denise sat in her kitchen staring at the phone. Amara found her there 20 minutes later, still processing the conversation. Mom? You look like you've seen a ghost. Denise looked up at her daughter, now 16, more confident and purposeful than she'd been a year ago. I think I might have seen the future instead. She explained Marcus's call and his proposition. Amara listened with growing excitement, asking questions about funding, expansion, and what it might mean for their family. But what about your job at the clinic? Amara asked. You just started in the community health outreach program. I don't know, Denise admitted. I love that work, but this could be something even bigger. Something that could help thousands of families instead of dozens. What does Mrs. Ruby think? I haven't told her yet. I wanted to talk to you first. They walked across the hall together to share the news with Mrs. Ruby. She was in her kitchen with Marlene, reviewing the week's schedule of activities and appointments. Marcus called, Denise announced without preamble. Mrs. Ruby looked up sharply. Is everything all right? He's moving back to Oakland. And he wants to help us expand the community care circle. Mrs. Ruby's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, joy, concern, and finally pride. That boy, she said, shaking her head. He's been worrying about me being alone here for years, and now he discovers I'm part of the most caring community I've ever experienced. Are you okay with the idea of him moving back? Amara asked. After being independent for so long? Mrs. Ruby smiled. Honey, I learned from watching you and your mama that independence isn't about being alone. It's about having choices and support systems that let you live the life you want. Having my son nearby will give me even more choices, not fewer. And what about the community care circle expansion? Denise asked. Marcus wants to provide funding to help us formalize the program and train other communities to start their own circles. Mrs. Ruby was quiet for a moment, considering. What do you think? Is that what you want? I think, Denise said slowly, that maybe this is why everything happened the way it did. Maybe Amara was meant to find you and we were meant to learn about community care, and all of this was meant to become something bigger than just our personal situation. That sounds like something my grandmother Dorothy would have said, Mrs. Ruby observed. She always believed things happened for reasons, even when we couldn't see the bigger picture at the time. Over the next month, Marcus made several trips from Denver to Oakland, meeting with Denise, Amara, and Mrs. Ruby to discuss the expansion plans. He was a tall, thoughtful man in his 40s who clearly inherited his mother's warmth and wisdom. The model you've created, he explained during one of their planning sessions, addresses 3 critical gaps in elder care. First, the isolation that so many elderly people experience. Second, the lack of support for family caregivers. And third, the disconnect between professional services and community-based care. But how do we make sure it stays authentic if we try to replicate it in other places? Amara asked. Won't each community have different needs and dynamics? Marcus smiled at her question. That's exactly the right thing to worry about. The key is to provide framework and training, but let each community adapt the model to their own culture and needs. Like a recipe that people can modify based on what ingredients they have available, Mrs. Ruby suggested. Perfect analogy, Marcus said. We provide the basic recipe, monthly meetings, professional partnerships, resource sharing, emergency protocols. But each community decides what specific services they need, which organizations they partner with, how they handle cultural and language differences. The more they talked about expansion, the more excited Denise became. But there was one concern she couldn't shake. What about us? She asked during one planning meeting. If this becomes a formal nonprofit organization with professional staff, what happens to our role? Do we become employees? Volunteers? Are we still part of the community we started, or do we become administrators? It was Marcus who provided the answer that felt right. You become trainers and mentors, he said. You help other communities start their own circles. You provide ongoing support and consultation. You continue to run your original circle here, but you also help the model spread to other neighborhoods. Like teacher practitioners, Amara said thoughtfully. We keep doing the work, but we also teach other people how to do it. Exactly. And you get paid for both roles. This becomes your career, not just your volunteer work. That evening, as Denise and Amara walked along the waterfront near their apartment, they talked about how much their lives had changed in just 1 year. Remember when our biggest worry was my grades and your work schedule? Amara asked. I remember when we barely knew our neighbors' names, Denise replied. And now we're talking about starting a non-profit organization to help communities across the city. Are you ready for that kind of change, baby? It means our lives will be even more public, more connected to other people and their problems. Amara was quiet for a few minutes, watching the lights reflect on the water. I think I am ready. But I want to make sure we don't lose what we have. I don't want us to get so busy helping other families that we forget to take care of our own family. Our own family meaning you, me, and Mrs. Ruby? And Marcus when he moves back. And Jerome and his grandfather. And Elena and her mother. And Destiny. And all the people who have become family through the community care circle. Denise felt her heart swell with pride and love. Her daughter understood something that many adults never learned. That family could be both blood relations and chosen connections. That community could be intentionally created. That caring for others and caring for yourself weren't competing priorities. We'll make sure we don't lose that, she promised. In fact, making sure other communities don't lose that connection will be one of our most important jobs as trainers. 3 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Denise stood in front of a room full of people from 12 different Oakland neighborhoods. They were there for the first Community Care Circle training workshop, funded by Marcus's organization and hosted by the Senior Center. A year ago, she began, my daughter was secretly caring for our elderly neighbor because all 3 of us thought we had to handle our problems alone. Today we're here because we've learned that the best solutions come from people working together. Amara stepped forward to share her part of the story, the teenager's perspective on caregiving, the importance of intergenerational relationships, the way community support had allowed her to succeed in school while staying connected to Mrs. Ruby. Mrs. Ruby spoke about aging in community versus aging in isolation, about the difference between receiving services and being part of a family. Marcus provided the organizational framework and resource information. But the most powerful part of the workshop came when participants shared their own stories, the challenges they were facing, the resources they wished existed, the connections they hoped to build. This feels like church, said one elderly woman from West Oakland. Not the religious part, but the community part. The feeling that you belong somewhere and people care about what happens to you. It feels like family, said a middle-aged man who was caring for both his mother and his teenage nephew. The kind of family where people show up for each other. By the end of the day, 8 new community care circles were scheduled to launch in the following months. Each would be adapted to their specific neighborhood. Some bilingual, some focused on specific cultural communities, some designed for apartment buildings versus single-family house neighborhoods. But all would be based on the same core principles. Neighbors supporting neighbors, professional partnerships for complex cases, and the understanding that no one should have to face caregiving challenges alone. As participants left, clutching their resource packets and newly exchanged contact information, Denise felt a sense of completion that was also a beginning. We did it, Amara said, flopping into one of the workshop chairs. We actually taught other people how to create what we created. More importantly, Mrs. Ruby added, we proved that what we created wasn't just a lucky accident. It's something that can be intentionally built in other places. Marcus gathered his notes and planning materials, looking satisfied. This is just the beginning. By next year we could have community care circles in 20 neighborhoods. By the year after we could be training communities in other cities. But we'll always have ours, Amara said, a hint of anxiety in her voice. We'll always have ours, Denise assured her. That's where we learned everything we're teaching. That's our home base. That evening, their original community care circle met for their monthly gathering. All the familiar faces were there, plus a few new ones. Jerome's grandfather was doing well after his head injury and had become one of the group's most enthusiastic participants. Elena's mother was now fluent enough in English to share her stories directly with the group. Destiny had graduated high school with honors and was starting college with a scholarship specifically for student caregivers. But the real measure of their success wasn't in the expansion or the recognition or even the funding. It was in the way Mrs. Ruby moved through the meeting, confident, valued, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. It was in the way Amara effortlessly connected with both elderly participants and other teenage caregivers. It was in the way the community had become self-sustaining, with people naturally stepping up to help each other without being asked. "You know what I've realized?" Amara said as they cleaned up after the meeting. "We didn't just solve Mrs. Ruby's problem, or even our family's problem. We figured out how to solve the loneliness problem." "The loneliness problem?" Denise asked. "The way people get isolated from each other. The way families try to handle everything alone. The way elderly people lose their connections. The way teenagers like me feel like we can't talk to adults about real problems. We figured out how to bring people back together." Mrs. Ruby nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we did. And now we're teaching other communities how to do it too." As they turned off the lights in the community room, Denise thought about all the families in all the neighborhoods who would soon have access to the support and connection they'd discovered. She thought about elderly people who wouldn't have to age in isolation, family caregivers who wouldn't have to struggle alone, teenagers who wouldn't have to carry adult responsibilities without support. Most importantly, she thought about communities that would be strengthened by the simple but revolutionary idea that taking care of each other was everyone's responsibility and everyone's privilege. Change, she realized, wasn't just about adapting to circumstances. Sometimes change was about creating new circumstances, building new possibilities, refusing to accept that isolation and struggle were inevitable. Sometimes change was about love becoming action, action becoming community, and community becoming hope. 1 year later, Denise stood on the small stage in the community center auditorium, looking out at an audience of over 200 people. Community care circles from 25 Oakland neighborhoods were represented, along with delegations from San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento who wanted to start programs in their cities. "When we gather for our annual community care convention," she began, "we're not just celebrating the growth of a program. We're celebrating the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change in their communities." The past year had been a whirlwind of growth, learning, and adjustment. The nonprofit organization, formerly named the Community Care Alliance, now employed 6 people, including Denise as Director of Community Education and Amara as Youth Program Coordinator. Marcus had moved back to Oakland and served as Executive Director, while Mrs. Ruby held the honorary title of Founding Elder and Community Wisdom Keeper. But success had brought its own challenges. Rapid expansion meant constant training workshops, site visits, and consultation calls. There were days when Denise felt like she was in meetings about community care more than she was actually providing it. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," she confided to Mrs. Ruby the week before the convention. "I miss when it was just us figuring out how to help you age in place with dignity." "But look what that simple beginning has become," Mrs. Ruby had replied, gesturing to the stack of thank you letters from families across the state who had been helped by community care circles. "Your grandmother Dorothy always said that small acts of love could have big consequences if you didn't try to control where they led." Now, speaking to the assembled audience, Denise reflected on that wisdom. The Community Care Alliance started because a teenager was brave enough to help an elderly neighbor, and a family was willing to admit they needed support. It grew because communities were hungry for connection and mutual aid. It succeeded because we learned to balance heart with expertise, informal support with professional services. She introduced the day's speakers, community members who had started local circles, healthcare professionals who had partnered with the program, policymakers who were interested in scaling community-based care models. But the most powerful presentations came from the participants themselves. Elena, now a certified community health worker, talked about how the bilingual Spanish-speaking circle she'd started had connected dozens of Latino families with healthcare and social services. Jerome, who had left his second job to become a full-time caregiver for his grandfather, shared how the support group for male caregivers had given him strategies and solidarity he'd never found anywhere else. Destiny, now a college sophomore studying social work, presented research she'd conducted on the academic outcomes of student caregivers who participated in peer support programs. And Mrs. Ruby, now 80 years old and using a walker but still sharp and engaged, spoke about the difference between aging with services and aging with community. "Services come and go," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "Providers change, funding changes, programs end. But community endures. The people in this room have become my family, and families don't abandon each other when times get hard." During the lunch break, Denise found herself in conversation with a woman from Portland who wanted to start community care circles in Oregon. "What's the most important thing we need to know?" the woman asked. What's the key to making this work? Denise thought about all the lessons they'd learned, all the mistakes they'd made and corrected, all the unexpected challenges and solutions. Start small and let it grow naturally, she said. Don't try to solve every problem right away. Focus on connection first, services second. And remember that you're not trying to replace professional care, you're trying to create the community support that makes professional care more effective. What about when it gets big and complicated? How do you maintain the personal touch? You make sure that the people who started it stay connected to the daily work, Denise replied. You resist the temptation to professionalize everything. And you keep asking the people you serve what they actually need, not what you think they need. That afternoon, during a workshop on sustainability and funding, Marcus presented data about the Community Care Alliance's impact. Emergency room visits among elderly participants had decreased by 30%. Caregiver stress and burnout had dropped significantly. Academic performance among student caregivers had improved markedly. But the numbers that meant the most to Denise were different. The percentage of elderly participants who reported feeling part of a community, 94%. The percentage of family caregivers who said they had people to call in a crisis, 87%. The percentage of participants who had developed close friendships through their local circles, 78%. Community care isn't just about helping people meet their basic needs, Amara explained to a group of teenagers from various circles. It's about helping people feel like they belong somewhere, like their lives matter to other people. As the convention wound down, Denise found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. From a single mother working double shifts and trying to handle everything alone, to the director of an organization that was transforming how communities approached elder care and family support. Are you tired? Mrs. Ruby asked, settling into the chair next to Denise as participants began to leave. Physically, yes, but not tired of the work. Good. Because there's still more to do. Mrs. Ruby was right. Despite their growth and success, there were still elderly people aging in isolation, family caregivers burning out from lack of support, teenagers carrying responsibilities too heavy for their young shoulders. But now they had a model that worked, a network of communities committed to caring for each other, and proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change. Grandma Ruby, Amara said, joining them as the auditorium emptied, what do you think great-grandmother Dorothy would say about all this? Mrs. Ruby smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I think she'd say that love has a way of multiplying when you give it away. She'd say that community isn't something you find, it's something you build. And she'd say that the three of us proved that families can grow in the most unexpected ways. That evening, the original Community Care Circle met for their monthly gathering. Despite all the expansion and formalization, this meeting remained what it had always been. Neighbors supporting neighbors, sharing resources and stories, making sure no one faced life's challenges alone. I have an announcement, Mrs. Ruby said when it was time for personal updates. Marcus has asked me to move in with him when he buys his house next month. The room fell silent. Mrs. Ruby had lived in her apartment for over 40 years. Moving felt like the end of an era. But, she continued with a smile, I told him I'd only consider it if the house was within walking distance of this building, because I'm not leaving my Community Care Circle family. Relief and laughter filled the room. And, Mrs. Ruby added, I told him the house needs to be big enough for a monthly hosting rotation, because after all we've been through together, I'm not about to stop having you all over for dinner. Jerome raised his hand. Does this mean we need to start a moving support committee? It means, said Elena, that we get to help Mrs. Ruby transition to a new phase of life, just like she helped all of us. It means, added Destiny, now visiting from college, that we prove community care works for all kinds of life changes, not just crises. It means, said Amara quietly, that we get to keep being a family, just in a slightly different configuration. As the meeting ended and people gathered their coats and bags, Denise realized they had come full circle. They'd started with an elderly woman who needed support to age in place with dignity. They'd built a community around that need. They'd expanded that community to serve hundreds of families. And now they were supporting their founding elder through another major life transition. But more than that, they'd proven that care and community weren't luxuries for people who had extra time and resources. They were necessities that communities could provide for each other through intentional commitment and mutual support. Mom, Amara said as they walked home together, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't helped Mrs. Ruby that first day? All the time, Denise admitted. I wonder if we would have stayed isolated and struggling. I wonder if Mrs. Ruby would have had to move to assisted living. I wonder if you would have burned out from trying to carry everything alone. But we'll never know because that's not what happened. That's not what happened, Denise agreed. What happened is that you were brave enough to help someone, and Mrs. Ruby was wise enough to let you, and I was smart enough to stop trying to control everything and start working with both of you. And what happened is that we figured out how to turn a secret into a community. As they reached their building, Denise looked up at the windows of the apartments where their original community care circle members lived. Lights were on in most of them, families going about their evening routines, but families who were no longer isolated, no longer trying to handle everything alone. You know what I'm most proud of? She asked Amara. What? That we didn't just solve our problems. We created a way for other people to solve theirs too. Together, Amara added. Together, Denise agreed. They climbed the stairs to their floor, passing Mrs. Ruby's door where they could hear her and Marcus talking and laughing as they planned her move. The sound filled Denise with warmth and gratitude. Change, she had learned, wasn't something that happened to you. Change was something you could choose, something you could create, something you could share with others who were ready to build something new. And the most beautiful changes weren't the ones you planned or controlled. They were the ones that grew from small acts of courage and kindness, nurtured by community, and allowed to become whatever they needed to become. Tonight, as she had every night for the past 2 years, Denise fell asleep feeling grateful for the family they'd found, the community they'd built, and the changes they'd created together. 2 years later, on a warm September morning, Denise stood in the kitchen of Mrs. Ruby's new house, helping prepare for a very special celebration. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of the first community care circle meeting, but it was also something much more personal. Hand me that serving platter, would you? Mrs. Ruby called from where she was arranging cookies at the kitchen island. At 82, she moved more slowly but with the confidence of someone who was exactly where she belonged. I still can't believe Amara is getting married at 18, Denise said, carefully lifting the platter down from the cabinet. I can, Mrs. Ruby replied with a smile. That girl has always known her own mind. And besides, she's not just getting married, she's starting her master's program in social work, launching the Youth Leadership Initiative, and planning to live in the same neighborhood as her family. She's got it all figured out. When you put it like that, it doesn't seem so young. Dorothy married at 18 and raised 5 children while working full-time, Mrs. Ruby reminded her. Different times, but some things don't change. When you know what you want and you have community support, age is just a number. Through the kitchen window, Denise could see the backyard where Marcus and Jerome were setting up tables and chairs. The yard was perfect for gatherings, large enough for their growing extended family, but intimate enough to maintain the closeness that had always defined their community. Mrs. Ruby, Denise said, pausing in her food preparation, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. Do you ever miss living in the apartment? Miss the way things were when we first started? Mrs. Ruby considered the question carefully. I miss the simplicity sometimes. I miss being able to just knock on your door instead of having to walk 3 blocks. But I don't miss the isolation I felt before you and Amara came into my life. But this house, living with Marcus, having nurses and aides coming and going, it's so different from that first year when it was just us figuring everything out. Different isn't always worse, Mrs. Ruby said gently. I needed different kinds of support then than I need now. And you and Amara needed different kinds of family then than you need now. She gestured toward the window where they could see Amara and her fiancé David hanging streamers in the gazebo Marcus had built for outdoor gatherings. Look at that girl. 3 years ago, she was carrying the weight of my care all by herself and afraid to tell you about it. Today, she's confident enough to know what she wants, brave enough to ask for help when she needs it, and wise enough to understand that love grows when you share it instead of hoarding it. Denise watched her daughter laughing with David, a young man she'd met in college who shared her passion for community organizing and social justice. Their wedding next month would be held right here in this backyard, officiated by the pastor from Mrs. Ruby's church and attended by every member of their original community care circle. And look at you, Mrs. Ruby continued. 3 years ago, you were working yourself to exhaustion trying to prove you could handle everything alone. Today, you're running a nonprofit that helps hundreds of families, but you're also planning your daughter's wedding, supporting my transition to new living arrangements, and dating that nice Dr. Foster. We're not dating, Denise protested automatically, though she felt her cheeks warm. Honey, when a man brings you coffee every morning at the community center and stays after every meeting to help you clean up, that's dating. You just haven't made it official yet. Before Denise could respond, the front door opened and voices filled the house. The Community Care Alliance annual celebration was about to begin, and families from across the Bay Area were arriving to share food, stories, and updates about their local circles. Grandma Ruby, called a voice from the living room. It was Sophia, the 10-year-old daughter of Elena, who had become Mrs. Ruby's honorary granddaughter. Mama made your favorite empanadas. And we brought the slideshow of all the new circles that started this year, added Jerome, carrying a laptop and projector. 28 new communities, including 3 in Southern California. As the house filled with people, Denise felt the familiar warmth of belonging that these gatherings always brought. There were original Community Care Circle members, newer participants from circles across Oakland, staff from the Community Care Alliance, and family members of all ages. But there were also new faces, a delegation from Seattle that wanted to adapt their model for rural communities, researchers from UCSF who were studying the health outcomes of community-based care, and policymakers who were exploring ways to fund and support similar programs statewide. Before we eat, Marcus announced when everyone had gathered in the backyard, I want to share some news about where we're going next. He gestured for Denise to join him at the front of the gathering. 3 years ago, my mother called me in Denver to tell me about the amazing family that had adopted her in Oakland. Today, I'm announcing that the Community Care Alliance has received a federal grant to train community organizers in 50 cities across the country. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Denise felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd created from such simple beginnings. But, Marcus continued, we want to make sure that expansion doesn't come at the cost of local connection. So we're also announcing the launch of the Neighborhood Leadership Program, which will train local residents to become certified community care organizers in their own neighborhoods. Amara stepped forward, her engagement ring catching the afternoon sunlight. I'm honored to announce that I'll be directing this program as part of my graduate school fieldwork. We'll be training people like my mom, like Grandma Ruby, like all of you, people who understand that real change starts with neighbors caring for neighbors. And, added Mrs. Ruby, accepting a microphone from Marcus, we're establishing the Dorothy Brooks Community Wisdom Fund, named after my dear friend and Denise's grandmother. This fund will provide small grants to help community care circles support their most vulnerable members through unexpected crises. Denise felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Her grandmother's name would live on through this work, through the community they'd built in her memory. Dr. Foster appeared at her elbow, offering a tissue and a gentle smile. Your grandmother would be proud, he said quietly. I hope so, Denise whispered back. I know so, and I'm proud too. Of what you've built, of who you've become, of the way you've turned your family's challenges into hope for other families. As the afternoon progressed, people shared updates from their local circles. They celebrated successes, elderly people who had avoided nursing home placement thanks to community support, family caregivers who had returned to school or work because they had reliable help, teenagers who had graduated high school despite significant caregiving responsibilities. They also acknowledged challenges, circles that had disbanded due to lack of leadership, communities where language or cultural barriers had prevented full participation, families who had moved away and struggled to recreate the support they'd found. Not every community care circle will succeed, Denise said during the afternoon program. Not every community is ready for this kind of mutual support. But every attempt teaches us something about what works, what doesn't, and how to do better next time. And every success, added Elena, now the coordinator for Spanish-speaking circles throughout the East Bay, proves that isolation and struggle aren't inevitable. They're choices we can change. As the sun began to set and people started to leave, the original Community Care Circle members lingered in Mrs. Ruby's backyard. These were the people who had been there from the beginning, who had witnessed each other's struggles and growth, who had become family through intention and commitment. I have something to say, Destiny announced. She was now 21, a senior in college and about to start graduate school in public health. I want to thank all of you for showing me what community looks like. She looked around the circle, at Mrs. Ruby in her wheelchair but still the wise center of their group, at Jerome whose grandfather had passed away the previous year but who continued attending meetings to honor his memory, at Elena whose mother now lived in a memory care facility but who still coordinated support for other Spanish-speaking families. When I was 16, I thought I had to choose between helping my grandmother and having a normal teenage life. You all taught me that was a false choice. You showed me that helping family and having community support aren't opposites. They're the same thing. What you taught us, said Mrs. Ruby softly, is that young people have wisdom and strength that we need. That community isn't about older people helping younger people or younger people helping older people. It's about all of us helping each other. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Denise found herself alone with Mrs. Ruby and Dr. Foster on the back porch. So, Mrs. Ruby said with a mischievous smile. When are you two going to stop pretending you're just friends? Dr. Foster laughed. We're not pretending anything. We're just taking our time. At our age, Denise added, rushing into things seems less important than making sure we're making good decisions. At your age, Mrs. Ruby said firmly, you have too much wisdom and experience to waste time being cautious about happiness. She stood up slowly, reaching for her walker. I'm going inside to help Marcus with the dishes. You two figure this out. After she left, Denise and Dr. Foster sat in comfortable silence, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Someone who understood that her definition of family extended far beyond any traditional boundaries. Michael got it. He'd been part of their community for over 3 years now. He understood that marrying Denise meant marrying into a network of relationships and responsibilities. He understood that Mrs. Ruby would always be their honorary grandmother, that Amara and David would always be their immediate family, that community care circle members would always have a place at their table. More than understanding it, he embraced it. His own parents had died young, and his first marriage had ended in divorce with no children. Being adopted into their extensive chosen family was exactly what he'd been looking for, even when he didn't know he was looking for it. As Denise walked down the aisle, her arm linked with Marcus's, who had asked for the honor of giving her away, she looked at all the faces watching her with love and joy. These were people who had seen her at her most overwhelmed and stressed. They had supported her through single motherhood, career transitions, and the challenges of building a nonprofit organization. They had celebrated her successes and helped her navigate her failures. Now they were here to witness her next chapter, just as she had witnessed theirs. Mrs. Ruby was crying happy tears, her hands clasped together in her lap. Elena was there with her teenage daughter, both of them beaming. Jerome sat with his new girlfriend, a social worker he'd met at a Community Care Alliance training workshop. Families from a dozen different community care circles had traveled to be there, some driving hours from as far as Los Angeles and Sacramento. But the person Denise's eyes kept returning to was Michael, standing at the altar with an expression of pure joy and gratitude. He looked like a man who couldn't believe his good fortune, who understood that he was being welcomed into something precious and rare. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, we are gathered here today not just to celebrate the marriage of Denise and Michael, but to celebrate the power of love to create family in all its forms. The pastor had known Mrs. Ruby for decades and had watched their community grow from its earliest days. His words reflected that understanding. Denise and Michael's love story began in community service. It grew through shared commitment to caring for others. It deepened through mutual respect and understanding. And it brought them to this moment, where they choose to bind their lives together in the presence of the people who matter most to them. During the exchange of vows, Denise spoke not just about her love for Michael, but about her gratitude for the community that had made their relationship possible. Michael, you fell in love with all of us. With me, with Amara, with Mrs. Ruby, with the work we do and the family we've built. You didn't ask me to choose between loving you and loving them. You asked to be part of the love we already shared. Michael's vows brought tears to many eyes. Denise, 3 years ago I thought I understood what it meant to care for people. I was a doctor. I treated patients. I provided medical services. But watching you and your family, I learned the difference between caring for people and loving people. I learned that healing happens in community, not just in examining rooms. I learned that the best way to honor the people I serve professionally is to build genuine relationships with the people I serve personally. When Pastor Williams pronounced them married and Michael kissed his new wife, the entire gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Ruby was clapping so enthusiastically that Marcus had to steady her wheelchair. Ladies and gentlemen, the pastor announced, I present to you Dr. and Mrs. Foster, and their extraordinary family. The reception that followed was pure celebration. Elena's family had prepared a feast of traditional Mexican dishes. Jerome had organized a playlist that included everyone's favorite songs from across 3 generations. The teenagers, led by Sophia and David, had created a slideshow of photos from community care circle events over the past 4 years. But the highlight of the reception was Mrs. Ruby's speech. 4 years ago, she began, standing slowly with her walker while the entire gathering fell silent, I was a lonely old woman who was afraid to ask for help. I thought independence meant doing everything alone, even when I couldn't do everything anymore. She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her with love and attention. Then a 15-year-old girl named Amara found me struggling in our apartment hallway. Instead of just helping me up and going on her way, she stayed. She asked if I was okay. She made sure I was safe. And that simple act of caring changed all our lives. Murmurs of agreement and recognition rippled through the crowd. Today I want to tell you what I've learned about the weight of love. Some people think love is a burden, something that ties you down, that limits your choices, that makes life more complicated. But I've learned that's only true if you try to carry love alone. She gestured toward Denise and Michael, toward Amara and David, toward the assembled crowd. When you share the weight of love, when you let community help you carry the responsibility of caring for each other, love becomes lighter, not heavier. It becomes joy instead of burden. It becomes possibility instead of limitation. Amara taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Denise taught me that accepting care doesn't make you dependent, it makes you interdependent. Marcus taught me that family obligations aren't burdens, they're privileges. She looked directly at Denise and Michael. And all of you taught me that love multiplies when you give it away. The more people you care about, the more people care about you. The more family you create, the more support you have. The more community you build, the stronger everyone becomes. Mrs. Ruby sat back down to thunderous applause, and Denise realized she was crying again. But this time they were tears of pure gratitude and joy. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, the original Community Care Circle members gathered one more time in Mrs. Ruby's living room. So, Elena said with a grin, what do we call ourselves now? The Community Care Circle Plus One? The Foster Family Circle? We call ourselves what we've always been, Mrs. Ruby said firmly. Family. Speaking of family, Amara said, exchanging a look with David, we have an announcement. Everyone turned to them expectantly. We found out yesterday that we're having twins, David said, his face glowing with excitement. The room erupted in celebration. Mrs. Ruby clapped her hands together with delight. Jerome whooped with joy. Elena immediately started planning a baby shower. Twins? Denise exclaimed, hugging her daughter. Oh my goodness, twins? A boy and a girl, Amara added. And we've already decided on names. If everyone approves. What names? Mrs. Ruby asked, though her eyes were already shining with suspicion and hope. Dorothy Ruby Foster for the girl, Amara said softly. After great-grandmother and Grandma Ruby. Mrs. Ruby burst into tears. Oh child. Oh my sweet child. And Marcus Jerome Foster for the boy, David added. After Uncle Marcus and Uncle Jerome. Marcus and Jerome both looked stunned and honored. Are you sure? Marcus asked. That's an incredible honor. We're sure, Amara said. You're all the reason we know what family looks like. You're all the reason we understand what it means to build community and care for each other. We want our children to carry those names and those values forward. As people finally began to leave for real, Denise and Michael stood on the front porch, watching their community disperse into the night. Cars pulled away carrying families back to apartments and houses across Oakland. But they weren't really leaving, they were carrying the connections they built here back to their own neighborhoods, their own community care circles, their own networks of mutual support. So, Michael said, putting his arm around his new wife, how does it feel to be Mrs. Foster? It feels like coming home, Denise said honestly. Like everything that came before was preparation for this moment, this family, this life. Even the hard parts? The years of struggling alone, the stress, the uncertainty. Denise thought about the single mother who had worked double shifts and tried to control everything herself. She thought about the woman who had found her daughter caring for their elderly neighbor in secret and had initially felt like a failure as a parent. Especially the hard parts, she said. Without the struggle, we wouldn't have learned to ask for help. Without the isolation, we wouldn't have known how precious community is. Without the fear, we wouldn't have learned to be brave. And without Amara's secret caregiving, we might never have discovered Mrs. Ruby. And without Mrs. Ruby, we might never have learned what family could really look like. They stood there for a few more minutes, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Somewhere, elderly people were going to sleep knowing that people cared about their well-being. Somewhere, family caregivers were resting easier because they had support and resources. Somewhere, teenagers were balancing school and family responsibilities with help from people who understood their challenges. What are you thinking about? Michael asked. I'm thinking about how much has changed since that day I found the note from Amara's principal. I'm thinking about how one family's crisis became a community's strength. I'm thinking about how secrets can become healing when you're brave enough to share them. And what are you feeling? Denise considered the question. She felt grateful, certainly. Hopeful about the future. Excited about becoming a grandmother to twins who would grow up surrounded by chosen family and unconditional love. But more than anything, she felt light. The weight of trying to handle everything alone was gone. The weight of fear and isolation had been replaced by the much more pleasant weight of connection and community. "I'm feeling loved," she said simply. "And not just by you, though I love you too. I'm feeling loved by all of them. By the family we've built together." "The weight of love," Michael said, echoing Mrs. Ruby's speech. "The weight of love," Denise agreed. "And it turns out, when you share it with the right people, it's the most beautiful weight in the world." As they turned to go inside, to their new life as a married couple, to their roles as community leaders, to their future as grandparents, Denise thought about her grandmother Dorothy, about the community she had built decades ago with Mrs. Ruby, about the legacy of care that had been passed down through generations. Tomorrow they would continue the work of building community care circles in new neighborhoods. They would support families through challenges and celebrations. They would train new leaders and expand the reach of community-based care. But tonight was for gratitude. Tonight was for love. Tonight was for the family they had chosen and built and nurtured together. Tonight was for understanding that the weight of love, when shared with community, becomes the foundation for everything good that follows. And as Denise drifted off to sleep in her new husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that her grandmother would be proud of the family they had become, the community they had built, and the love they had learned to share without fear or reservation. The weight of silence had been transformed into the weight of love. And love, when carried by many hands and many hearts, was light enough to lift everyone it touched.